There are 350,000, roughly, churches, congregations in the United States. Maybe 400,000 would be more accurate because we probably don't know about all of them that don't have a website or a telephone. So there's probably maybe as many as 400,000 churches. A lot of these churches in the months and in the few years ahead are going to have interim pastors for a longer period of time. We're going to see more time between pastors, which means a greater time for interim pastorates. We need to get ready for this surge. It's already taken place, but we need to get more ready for the surge of interim pastors that is taking place. In this particular issue, in this particular episode, we try to be singular because they're very brief, less than 10 minutes usually, and we want to just focus on a single issue. We're going to look at some of the challenges of interim pastors, but more on that in just a moment. As always, thank you, Belay. Belay Solutions is our sponsor. Belay, if you have not heard already, provides virtual workers like virtual assistants or virtual bookkeepers or virtual webmasters. And they have people that match your organization, become a part of your organization, but they take care of all the work. And they take care of the matching of these people to your organization. Incredible group of people. I've been using Belay for years, and I'll continue to use Belay. They have a free download for you called 25 Tasks a Pastor Can Delegate to an Assistant. You can see that in the show notes. You can just go to belaysolutions.com/Thom Rainer. Back to this challenge of interim pastors. We know this, folks. We know that there are going to be a lot more interim pastors than there are today. And we know that there are a lot more interim pastors today than there were just a year or two ago. There's a longer gap now from when a pastor leaves a church and they find the next pastor. That is called the interim pastor. And usually, or that's called the interim period, and usually it is filled with someone called the interim pastor. That is someone who comes in for a brief season between pastors. Now, we got more of these people coming. So what do we need to know? What are some of the challenges that these interim pastors have? Many of these churches will expect interim pastors to do full-time pastorate work, even though they're not compensated or even living on the field full-time. And that is one of the reasons why an interim pastor needs to spell out in writing, not necessarily a contract, you can do a contract, but at least an email, terms of agreement, exactly what you are agreeing to and what the church is agreeing to. If you've never heard the term scope creep refers to an organization or person expecting you to do more to it than that which you agreed to do. And you get into a church and you've agreed to give them 20 hours a week plus preaching, that's an example, and they start taking up all your time in different ways, and all of a sudden you're there 40 hours a week plus preaching. That's not what you agreed to do, and you probably cannot sustain it. Many of these churches are expecting full-time work from interims, even though they are not full-time themselves, nor are they full-time compensated. So that's one of the challenges of an interim pastor. You've got to lay out very clearly the terms of which you are coming. Again, this is not acting like it's a secular organization. It's just to make sure that there is clarity. This is what is expected of the interim pastor, and we're going to stay within these boundaries, and we're not going to expect more than we originally agreed to. Second thing, many of these churches, when they bring an interim pastor, they begin to use that interim pastor as a consultant. In other words, they would like that interim pastor to be an expert on almost anything. Now, many of these interim pastors have served in churches. They have a lot of information. Some of them may be well educated. And so they possibly can become good consultants, but they cannot know everything. And they cannot have this full bandwidth of knowledge to be able to provide churches. Just simply, I'm talking to you who are or will be interim pastors, or maybe I'm talking to you in churches who have an interim pastor or will. Make certain that you don't have unreasonable expectations. One is you don't have unreasonable expectations of time. And then secondly, this would be an unreasonable expectation of knowledge. They will not be like a consultant, though they can help you in some ways. A third challenge of interim pastors. Very simple. They don't have geographical proximity to the church they're serving. They can, but many of them don't. And what am I saying there? They have to travel to get to your church. There was a season when I was dean of a seminary many years ago that I did 10 interim pastorates in a row. And some of them would be distances of several hours away. And so I would have to commute on the weekend. I didn't live in the community. I didn't know these communities. I basically went in and then came out and came back to my family. And so many interim pastors have a geographical disadvantage because they have to travel to get these churches and because they're not known in the communities where the churches are. Just to let you know that, interim pastors, this is a challenge for you. Fourth, another challenge of interim pastors, most have not been trained to be an interim pastor. Let me say that again. Most have not trained to be an interim pastor. An interim pastor has unique needs, unique training needs. An interim pastor is certainly being a pastor helps, and certainly having a wide knowledge of churches helps. But there are specificities, there are things that are related to the interim pastor that are unique, and many are not trained. I would encourage you with all of my heart to check out Interim Pastor University, which is a training that Church Answers has been providing for years that is uniquely to the needs of an interim pastor. And by the way, church leaders, if you're entering an interim stage, perhaps you're right there now, you're about to be, maybe you can give this training to this pastor coming in so that pastor can be more competent in the area of interim pastors. Once again, they may have served faithfully as full-time pastors in many churches. They may be denominational leaders that have a breadth of knowledge about congregations, but interim pastors have their own uniqueness. And that's why we provide certification for interim pastors as well. So you can check out Interim Pastor University. So how do we sum up this? There will be a greater need for interim pastors. Churches are taking longer time between the pastor who left and the new pastor who comes on to find a pastor. The demand for interim pastors in numbers will be greater. But interim pastors will have a number of challenges. They're not full-time. Most of them are not a consultant. Many of them will not be geographically located where the church is, and therefore they'll have to commute or travel. And many of them are not trained specifically in the area of interim pastorate, which we, of course, referred to help you get that training at interimpastor.university. So we love the fact that many leaders are now training for this. We love the fact that many are more prepared, but the need will be greater. We're living in a world where churches are going to take longer to get a pastor for a number of reasons. That could be a podcast into itself. And so we need interim pastors who know what the expectations are and who come in clearly ready to serve. Well, thank you again for being a part of the Church Answers podcast. You know, we've been doing this podcast just a few months now. And because we put out 3 a week and put 3 out at the same time in 1 week, the number of podcasts is increasing. I'm going back and looking at all the information we have right now. It is unbelievable. And what is even more unbelievably gratifying is you, the listener or viewer on YouTube, if you're there and you're a part of this and you're a part of this new venture where we're taking singular issues and trying to find just what God would want us to know about that singular issue. Today, of course, is the challenges of interim pastors. So before we go, let me thank you for watching. Let me thank you for listening. Let me thank you for being a part of the Church Answers family and the Church Answers podcast family. And I always will thank Belay for their sponsorship, and I always am grateful that they started with us together. Stay tuned. We have other podcasts, and one of those podcasts are about, can you do away with a bunch of activities in your church? We'll talk about that in the next podcast. We'll see you at the Church Answers podcast. Hey, folks, this is a PS to our podcast. We got some exciting stuff that we want to offer you absolutely for free. Sam, when you think about predictive factors in a church's growth, if you take out demographics, what are some things that come to mind? Just two. I mean, don't give me a list of 10. Just two or three things that come to mind on predictive growth of a church.
Well, evangelism and whether the church is doing it or not.
Bingo.
And then I will add, is it an ongoing evangelism emphasis?
Double bingo. Well. Maybe something about leadership and their commitment to that. So all of the above.
Evangelistic churches have evangelistic pastors. Is the staff, is the lead pastor doing the work themselves?
We have a free download for you, and it's actually a sheet that you can self-score. You answer 20 questions, anywhere from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and we come back and we predict what your growth rate is going to be for the next year in worship attendance. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good tool. There's a link to that for the attendance predictor. Look in the show notes. You'll absolutely love it. That's cool. We'll see you soon.